Hi, my name is Angela Power Disney, or Angie. I was born Angela Power, Angela Teresa Power, and given a confirmation name Elizabeth after my German godmother Lieselotte, whose father was a Nazi and whose husband was a pedophile, who victimized myself and my sisters and probably many others. He's dead now. I'm going to reshare, hopefully in a clear way, the bones of my testimony from early childhood. I'm a military child. My father was in the Royal Air Force for 25 years, which included the first 12 of mine and the first 13 of my sister, who's now dead, and 14 of my older sister. There are 5 girls in our family. I reported to the police very belatedly after my sister Fiona died in very suspicious circumstances 3 years ago when she was 58. I believe my father poisoned her and perhaps gave her a blow to the left temple as well, which showed up in the autopsy but was written off. So I went and finally reported our father, parents, multiple abusers in the extended family and friends, quote unquote, network, and also what I suspect was a military paedophile ring. I suspect certainly myself and my 2 older sisters, and possibly all of us, were subjects in no consent medical experiments and what is widely referred to as MKUltra, mental controller, and project, paperclip, and so on, post-World War II, whereby the experiments started in the Nazi Holocaust were continued, picked up by not just the American government, but less well known, also the British. And children in the military were particularly favoured as subjects, especially if they'd come from multi-generational abusive backgrounds and or were bloodline family children, as I later discovered our family was. The dogs, the red setters out in the garden. Do you want to come in or out? You have to come in or out. I'm not leaving the door open. Here we go. Let's go. So I went not long after my sister died on May Day, 3 years ago, 2015, and in June I reported both my parents and the military, in the first instance, to Brixton Police. I have recordings, although mysteriously many recordings have disappeared on a phone, an old phone, but I'm given to understand that they can be recovered. The Metropolitan Police referred me to Wiltshire Police, which was the last known area where my father savagely beat me. And this was, as I say, 3 years ago, around the time that this brave Chief Constable Tim Veal of Wiltshire Police was investigating posthumously the ex-British Prime Minister, Sir Edward Heath. Strangely, I understood being transferred out of the Metropolitan Police to Wiltshire Police for investigation. What wasn't as apparent was why Wiltshire Police seemed to be superseded by Avon and Somerset Police. So I had a detective constable at Wiltshire Police. I had 2, actually. The first one, strangely, was taken off the case, and when I inquired why, I was told it was just random, nothing to worry about. So then another Wiltshire to DC was allocated, and then a sergeant, detective sergeant from Avon and Somerset strangely took precedence over the case. And then I did I think it was a 3-hour videoed statement at Melksham, where we used to live for a while, with the DC from Wiltshire Police and the detective sergeant from Avon and Somerset. I then was given monthly updates by email for 6 months. And again, strangely, the detective sergeant used to email me and would not copy in the DC at Wiltshire Police. I would always copy in the DC on return mails, and sometimes even copy in the DC that had been taken off the case that was originally allocated. And I just noticed it as strange that she kept trying to just leave Wiltshire Police out of the equation. I didn't think much of this until I listened to a disclosure recently, a first-time disclosure by a very credible English gentleman. I think his name is David Goland. I'll refer to that disclosure, where he referred also to having been passed around between 3 different police forces and having got nowhere with his very credible, very detailed disclosure. And so my ears pricked up like, oh my goodness, why would they do this? Pass you from one police force to another. And one possibility that occurred to me was Wiltshire Police were at that time investigating Sir Edward Heath. And so perhaps they didn't want corroborating disclosures in that jurisdiction. Mr. Goland was told that they couldn't prosecute his case because no other similar disclosures had been forthcoming, which may or may not corroborate what he was saying. And again, my ears pricked up because he and I had a lot in common, including having been hunted as children. So I'm going to make a series of unlisted, for the moment, disclosures, and I'm going to read the monthly updates that I was given and seek answers as to why my case was suddenly and dramatically dropped after 6 months in a shocking way, in a way where the DS from Avon and Somerset said, the case is dropped and I can't even reply to any more emails. It's like, what? It was quite traumatizing. And the grounds I was given for the case being dropped were that mainly they were saying they couldn't prosecute because my father has a diagnosis of dementia. And my question about that is, how can you say that a case cannot be pursued because the alleged main perpetrator, facilitator, has dementia diagnosis? Then surely you're giving carte blanche to abusers, particularly in advanced years, that all they have to do is get a medical diagnosis of dementia to get off the hook. I was told, well, he can't understand a Miranda, he can't understand having his rights read to him, and therefore the case can go nowhere. And again, I say, and we've seen this with Rebel Jana, I'm not sure if Rolf Harris tried to plead dementia, but even the likes of Rebel Jana MP, who allegedly died, first of all, got off the hook on grounds of dementia and then died before, because a judge ruled that even though he had a dementia diagnosis, testimony of 17 children's home survivors could be heard. And before that could happen, he allegedly died, as did Leon Britton allegedly died. But Greville Jenner in his day had been an advocate for tracking down Nazis. And I believe one of the ones that was imprisoned was 84. I believe there's a paedophile in jail at the age of 94, originally from Hope de la Garenne, a victim and first, and then later a perpetrator. So it struck me as very strange when my case was so dramatically dropped. And as I say, I was traumatized. I didn't have sufficient confidence to even go through the process of complaining to the IPCC, the International Police Complaints Commission, independent, I beg your pardon, supposedly, Police Complaints Commission, because they don't have any teeth. They can only make recommendations, which are often flouted and ignored, as is the case with Metropolitan Police on the Hampstead. 2 complaints upheld by PCC on the Hampstead case, which have not been acted upon. So this is my first time revisiting it, and I'm just grateful for Mr. Goland documenting his testimony, which this is the only way we're going to get heard, is if enough of us speak up and start joining dots. Also, in the 6-month investigation into my reports and complaints, there were several red flags along the way. The DS told me that, first of all, a sergeant from the Royal Air Force was allocated to the case, sergeant specialising in sexual assault within the military. But she told me that in the end, no medical records could be found for my first 12 years of life. And that the Royal Air Force had been so uncooperative that she and her colleagues had complained to the equivalent of the military ombudsman about their lack of cooperation and transparency. She also told me, because I live in Ireland now, although most of the abuse took place outside, well, some of the family abuse took place in Ireland, but most of my organised abuse took place within the military, so in England and in Germany and in Gibraltar. So, as I say, I made my complaint in the UK, hoping to join up with the IICSA, the Royal Commission Inquiry. But I live in Ireland, and so do my parents, both alive, separated. My father's 92, my mother's 84, 85 this year. Yeah, 1926, my dad was born 1933, my mother. One of my siblings lives here, my youngest sibling. One is now dead, which set me on this reporting journey. And the other 2 live in the UK and are uncooperative and in denial. But so the Irish police were asked to help cooperate with the Wiltshire or Avon and Somerset police in terms of interviewing my parents and my youngest sibling and so on and so forth. And it was also noted in the reports to me that the Irish Gardaí were not cooperating. I also signed permission for Avon and Somerset and Wiltshire police to obtain my medical records, all of them. Obviously, the first 12 years were within the military, and they informed me that those were not forthcoming. My medical records from Ireland, where I've lived full-time since 1996, were not released. The HSE did not cooperate either, despite my having given permission for all medical records to be released. And a flimsy excuse was given that I hadn't attended for a while and I'd have to ask them in person. So I need to do that. I need to at least secure what records there are. And again, having grown up in the military and then compulsively moved most of my life, I've lived in 49 homes in 7 countries on 3 continents. So but I can at least trace my medical records since 1996, and so I'll do that. I'm kind of reinvigorated to not give up. And I suspect this way of testifying publicly and hoping for other survivors to join, to join the dots. We may not get justice. I'd like to think we will, but like me, I'm sure there are survivors out there that just crave the truth. The other thing that makes me want to revisit this is the fact that I started really deprogramming majorly. Well, to be honest, I've always had some very troubling from the age of birth to 8, or the age of infancy to 8, I've had very troubling memories, but I could never make sense of them. I didn't know about MKUltra. I didn't know about memory wiping and drugging and so on and so forth. So because I couldn't contextualize them or make sense of them, I left them alone. I got counseling for the things I could remember from the age of 8 onwards. And I mentioned a lot of the troubling anomalies and memories under the age of 8. And the advice from my counselor at that time was, let them come up when you're ready. Don't go for hypnosis or, kind of forcing the memories to surface. Curiously, he said, because it won't be admissible in court. And I hadn't talked at all about, foreseeing court proceedings or whatever. He was a Maudsley trained he was a psychologist. I think he was a psychologist, but maybe I'm wrong. If he trained at the Maudsley, it might have been psychiatry. But anyway, he was a guy I went to counseling for. So I started working on healing my past, I suppose at the age of 43 or something like that, very belatedly. And then became kind of willing to look at my early childhood trauma a few years later. And then in 2014, I had 2 major surgeries, and the anesthetic caused me to sort of in a galloping way deprogram and start to remember and revisit traumas that in the past, up until then had made no sense to me, and I desperately wanted to just let go and live a life and not live in the past and blah, 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 and so on and so forth. So, and then I was in London before I had this, before my sister died in mysterious circumstances. I was in London and I'll be honest, I smoked a little pot and it caused flashbacks. And in one of the flashbacks, I had always remembered in the hunting trauma, the one that I remember too, but the one that really stood out, I had always known I was running for my life and felt like my heart was going to break out of my chest. I recorded this back on a DVD I made somewhere like 2008 or 9. Just really running for my life through a wooded area, and finally tripping over a root of a tree, and then falling face down. And I described all this in my statement to the police, and then blacking out, and then waking face up, as I understood it, being urinated on by a circle of men around me. And forgive me for seeming dissociated as I recall and recount this stuff. That's just part of DID. But I remember noting at the time that one of the men standing above me was in army uniform. And having grown up in the Air Force and you know, a very clear memory I have from the Royal Air Force in Gibraltar. We used to get a bus to a private Jesuit-influenced Catholic ladification convent school. And on the bus, we used to sing this song, you know, Army's balmy, Navy's crazy, up with the RAF, you know, just a childlike identification with being Air Force. And so in that childish way, I remember looking up helpless and humiliated and battered and bruised and you know, coming conscious again. I remember thinking, why is there a man with an army uniform here? You know, we're Air Force. And that was as much of that frozen memory as I'd registered until I heard Esther Baker's testimony. Very brave testimony featured in an Australian 60 Minutes about elite pedophiles in the UK. And with the flashback in London a few years ago, I saw the face of that man in the army uniform standing around me on the forest floor, and I believe that was Lord Bramall. Even as I recalled that, I thought, well, there's no point telling anybody, you know, who's going to believe me. I'd already heard Michael Shrimpton, apparently a whistleblower who testifies to Edward Heath sodomizing and facilitating the murder of children's home boys, but adamantly denying that Lord Bramall had ever been a pedophile. And I didn't have a grudge to bear or an axe to grind. I just recognized, you know, I looked at several photos of him online after the Esther Baker disclosures, and I was shocked because I believe he was one of those that hunted me. And so I'm just sharing that. I'm trying to think if there's anything else in my introduction. Even just opening, I've got a folder of emails which include the updates from the police, and even just going into that folder is triggering for me. It has many emails from my sister that died. I call her my Irish twin because we were just 11 months apart in age. And it also includes many emails between my siblings and I, from whom I'm estranged because of my disclosures and my belief that my father murdered our sister. So, you know, in an ideal world, I would collate the emails in date order and redact the email addresses of the detective sergeant at Avon and Somerset and the detective constable at Wiltshire Police. So in an effort to do this with excellence, I will do that. You know, I don't want to get tripped up again in trying to disclose, because so often victims are persecuted and prosecuted rather than securing justice. They are prosecuted. So I'll leave this as part one of a series of unlisted, for the moment, disclosures I'm going to do. And I'll continue. I will collate the emails and do it properly, and then read out the email updates over the 6-month period that I engaged with. You know, tried to engage with Wiltshire Police, but it was actually usurped by Avon and Somerset Police. And I'm not sure if I said that. Yeah, I think I did say that I wonder, given that Mr. Goland was told they couldn't proceed with his complaint because no other victims had come forth with any corroborating or similar disclosures, I strongly suspect that we were each farmed out to different police forces in order, and certainly away from Tim Veal's Wiltshire investigation into Ted Heath, exactly so they could compartmentalise disclosures or lose them, disappear them. We all know how many dossiers disappear. So I made a sort of clumsy attempt at disclosure with someone I now suspect to be actually gathering these kind of disclosures for different motives than one would have hoped, namely Miles Johnston, the basis. I may be wrong, and I'm open to being wrong, but if you go to my YouTube channel, Angela Power Disney, you'll find bases 1 to 6 or 1 to 7. There's hours of testimony I gave then, although I think that was about 2013, and I'm further along the road now, which is why I'm updating my situation and my disclosure. Something that struck me as a bit strange at the time of my reporting to Wiltshire Police was that I stayed at Miles Johnston's house while I went and did my report. And the police insisted on dropping me back to his house after my 3.5 hour statement. And I don't know if they were doing that out of concern for my well-being because I was a little bit dissociated, or if it was something different. And the other strange thing is that they went and interviewed him. And although I'd given him a lengthy 5-6 hour disclosure about my life, I was just a bit taken aback that they would go and interview Miles Johnston, who I'd only known a couple of years, maybe a year, and yet they didn't interview any of my sisters face to face, even the ones that live in the UK, let alone my parents. And even with my father's diagnosis of dementia, my mother does not have a diagnosis of dementia, although my youngest sibling is trying hard to get her one. They could have interviewed my mother. There were certain facts that were absolutely verifiable. For instance, my oldest sister having a fractured skull at the age of 8 from my father, and being made a ward of court and placed in the care of the state at age 14. There were so many facts that could have been verified. It struck me as strange that police resources would be used to interview somebody like Miles Johnston, who didn't know my family and didn't know me in childhood. So that's part one. And I just pray for focus to resist the resistance, because it's hard to revisit this kind of stuff. But I think it's valuable, and I certainly see it's valuable from listening to other survivors like Esther and like, I think it's David Goland. I've blanked out his first name, but I will also find his testimony, which is hard to hear and slow going, but absolute a horrible introduction. I think I annoyed him. He says he was motivated to disclose for the first time, well, not publicly for the first time, because he was annoyed at the misinformation that was out in the public arena about mind control, particularly the British side of mind control, which is less known. And I think I would agree as well that one of the tactics of the shadow government, if you want to call them that, to keep a lid on survivors worldwide disclosing, is to throw in a few fake survivor stories to discredit all of us. And you know, I just ask people to use discernment, and I'm not going to judge, but just know that it's an absolute minefield to disclose in this area, and some people lose their lives doing so. And I've certainly suffered a vast amount of persecution since I've started going public. I also campaigned and worked on the Hampstead satanic ritual abuse case for 3 years, and became the subject of what I believe is government sponsored, deep state government sponsored operation to discredit and destroy any credibility I might have, in order to discredit my testimonies. And so my reputation has been destroyed effectively. There's another, I'm going to try and pump out, get this out there, get this out there, get this out there. One example of discrediting was my daughter, who's now 32, rang me in distress when I was living in Lanzarote to tell me that she had been contacted by some of these trolls, as we called them back then. I call them cyber terrorists now, and most likely sponsored and paid. But they had messaged her saying things like, "Oh, we understand, your mum beat the crap out of you, blah, blah, blah." And so I published her Skype call with me at that time, where she was relaying to me what they said. But sadly, they cut and pasted. They just edited out the part where she said, "Oh, they're trying to say my mum bet the crap out of me once a week with a, metal rake or whatever." She was relaying to me what they'd said, but predictably, perhaps with hindsight, they edited that part of her relaying that to me, and they put it into a video as if it was her saying that as evidence. So that's just one example of where, but there's multiple. It's been like a tsunami of character assassination online, and more than online. But I won't go into that right now. So that's my introduction to having a go at getting the truth out there about being a victim of a military MKUltra and no consent medical experiments, mind control, drugging, traumatizing abuse, and being trained as a spy. And I always say that I won't lose those skills that who knows how much was invested into us as assets. We were just really guinea pigs, but who knows how much was invested into us to perform whichever roles we were assigned. So I don't believe I'll lose many of those skills for spying. The only difference is I no longer spy for dark forces or handlers. If I spy at all, I do it for God and for truth, for Jesus, who I believe is the reason I'm still alive. So that's it. You can find me blogging daily on Facebook. Strange they do this weird stuff. Never mind. On Facebook, Angela Power Disney. YouTube, same name. And I also have a blog, angelascaches.org. No apostrophe, and Caches is spelled Caches. God bless, and stay tuned for the next. As I say, unlisted, I'll circulate this mainly amongst survivors for now. And if the trolls catch up with it, I'm not lying, and I shouldn't even call them trolls, because they are cyber stalkers, harassers, malicious communicators, character assassins, cyber terrorists. God bless, and signing off for now.